Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ben Schrag. I'm going to be helping you out with this webinar. I am one of the program directors in the small business programs at the National Science Foundation. And I'm going to hopefully cover some basic information about your new Phase I Award and give you a chance to ask questions. I'm going to ask folks to please hold questions till the end. And it shouldn't be, I shouldn't spend too much time going through my slides here. And then we'll try to handle any questions you all have at the end. The thing that you were sent when you got an award, you were sent an email with a canned webinar that covered some of the same information. I apologize. I'm going to cover some of the same content that you may have already seen if you did the homework and watched that that recorded video. I just want to make sure that everyone gets this content at least once, and getting it again sometimes is also helpful. So launching in here. So first things first, congratulations. I know that all of you have been waiting for several months going through this process, and you should be proud of your patience and even more prouder that you were able to beat the odds and receive a Phase I award from the National Science Foundation. We have consistently been the most competitive program in the federal government in the SBIR world, and for good reason. We have very high standards, and we have an incredible portfolio of grantees, of which you are all now part. So thanks for persisting through the waiting and the documentation and the feedback and the questions and the doubts and the sometimes wonky government IT. Now, hopefully, we get a chance to actually go and do some really fun and productive and interesting things going forward. So good for you guys. I'm going to cover a bunch of very practical things here today about your Phase I award. It's really going to focus on two major themes. One is basically the opportunities that you're going to be given through this award, in addition to the funding, which I'm sure you all are familiar with, to try to help your company and your project be successful. And the other main thing is really to just explain the requirements and the responsibilities that you have by accepting funding for this project, the things that the government requires that you do and keep track of. So, you know, the first thing, and I think that maybe if you have one thing that you can take away from this first few weeks of your award, it's that you know who your program director is and you feel comfortable approaching them. We as the program directors are the most familiar person at the National Science Foundation about your company and your project. We're also the person who has the responsibility to say yes or no to a lot of the things you're going to ask for and to give guidance. And so you're never going to really do something wrong by, if you have a question or a concern, by going and reaching out to your program director. And so there's a number of transactional things that we will handle ourselves, and then there's a number of other things that we may refer you to a colleague of ours inside the National Science Foundation to handle with us. But again, the program director as the first point of contact is a really great takeaway for you all. You should I'm hoping you all know who your program director is, and hopefully some of you have corresponded or spoke to them beyond the due diligence phase that I'm sure all of you went through leading up to the award process. You'll also get a chance to meet them, to meet all of us in March at the Phase I Grantees Workshop. So you should, as I mentioned, you should have heard from your program director, and you should have also heard from our program, a central email from our program, including kind of basics of the award and some documents. Again, some of that information is going to overlap with what I talk about today. We want to make sure that we kind of send this information multiple ways to make sure we have the highest chance of getting your ear and getting in your mind share. You know, one of the really important things about this award is that even though the NSF is kind of strictly speaking funding a specific R&D scope at your project, you know, we really view this program and your award as an investment by the American government and taxpayer in your company and your company's commercial success. And so as program directors, we want to hear about how the specific R&D that we're paying for is going, but we also want to hear broadly about how your company is doing and how other things that are not necessarily part of our project, which may affect your company's impact and success. We want to hear about all of that. You know, we are all from the world of startups. We have all either been startup founders and or startup investors for the public or private sector. And so we are very interested and passionate about building businesses. And so we really like the part of our job where you tell us how things are going. And sometimes we'll even be able to obviously add value and to help you as you make the journey. First thing a lot of people want to know is how do you get your money? So the system that I'm sure you all have seen in your award letter that we use to disperse funds is called ACMS. All the information I think you should be able to find pretty self-explanatory about how to draw funding down. You should all have access to the entire amount of your Phase I award funds except for $25,000 at this point. And one thing to point out about ACMS, you can think about it a little bit like a bank account or an ATM machine that only goes one way. So you can go to ACMS as often as you want. You can draw down whatever amount you want at any time. It's always open, more or less. But you can't put money back. So it's a one-way flow of money. And your accountant may tell you that taking money from this account that's on ACMS and taking it down into your company's bank account does have tax implications. So I would encourage you to make sure you understand those implications before you draw down, especially a large amount of money from ACMS. So we are now in January. The things about this award are very quickly spinning into motion, and things are going to kind of come very fast and furious for you all in the next few months. You all, I think, have gotten some information about the Beat the Odds Bootcamp, and you either have or in the near future will hear about the Commercialization Assistance Program. Now, these two programs, I'm going to talk about both of them in subsequent slides, but you will basically be starting to get the first information about both of those, and I'll talk about them in a second. If you participate in the bootcamp, that will be a continuous process that will that really will spin up starting next week and will continue through the middle of March and the Phase I workshop. And whether or not you're participating in the bootcamp, all of you are expected to attend the Phase I workshop, which is March 16th to 18th. It's March 17th to 18th if you're not in the bootcamp. That first day is for the bootcamp participants only. And it is here in the Washington, D.C. area in Arlington, Virginia. And so we ask that you reserve the date, but do not actually reserve plane flights yet. There will be more information about exactly the dates and the times that you need to be on site. That will be coming in the near future. So there's a couple of programs that we offer for you as Phase I awardees that I'm going to talk about. These are two programs that are both optional but encouraged. They're both free of charge to you, and they are both intended for you to become a more commercially viable, more informed, stronger company and stronger Phase II applicant. The Commercialization Assistance Program, you may hear from a company we contract with called Dawnbreaker. We sometimes call the program Dawnbreaker because they're going to deliver this program for NSF. This will be something where they will reach out to you in the near future, and they will potentially work with you between now and all the way through the submission of your Phase II proposal. And so they may be working with you for over a year, depending on how long you decide to wait to submit the proposal. The point of the Commercialization Assistance Planning Program is really for Dawnbreaker to help you understand specifically the commercialization plan that is kind of the heart of your Phase II proposal, and to work with you to kind of draft and kick the tires of that commercialization plan as you get closer to Phase II. So they're going to be kind of an advisor specifically on your business model and your commercial side of your company. You're going to meet with them one-on-one at the Phase I workshop, and you probably will hear about how they work and some webinars and some content that they'll start to deliver in the next couple of months. And again, this will all be via email to the principal investigator of your project. The Beat the Odds Bootcamp is the other thing that is going to be spinning up here very quickly. The Beat the Odds Bootcamp, again, something that you have the opportunity to participate in free of charge if you choose. It is a kind of a condensed, lean version of the NSF Innovation Core program, and the goal is to familiarize you with the process of customer discovery and to basically have you start an experiential process of working with your customers to understand your business model, to basically hypothesize your business model for your company and to try to test those hypotheses by talking to stakeholders. Your team, your company will participate, typically multiple members of your company if possible. And again, there'll be guidance about how this customer discovery process works, and then you'll work with an instructor that NSF assigns to give you guidance and feedback as you contact and interview at least 30 customers, and those interviews will happen between now and the middle of March. So this is all going to start happening very quickly. Most of the content about customer discovery is not a secret. It's all online, and specifically there's some videos linked here in my slides that I think you've also been sent by email if you want to get a head start. The first webinar in this bootcamp is next week, but we'll be recording that webinar and probably subsequent webinars if it happens to be too soon for you to be able to make the live version of it. This entire program is run by the national I-Corps instructors that the NSF has selected. These are really top-notch folks in the field. They're really, really excellent, and I think you'll find them very helpful for your company. If you do participate in the bootcamp, you'll also be spending a day reporting out your findings and kind of working with other teams, again, at the Phase I workshop in March. So here's some timeline here. The one thing I'll say about the bootcamp is, the programming and the instructors and the stuff that we provide to you is paid for externally. It's not something that you have to pay for. But in doing customer discovery, you're going to have to spend time. Your team is going to have to spend time doing those customer interviews, and you may have to spend money traveling to customers or to events to meet customers. And as you may have seen, we allow our Phase I grantees to allocate up to $20,000 of your award budget to cover those costs of your time and your travel. If you have done that and you intend to participate in the bootcamp, that's great. If you want to participate in the bootcamp and you have not allocated money from your Phase I budget, just talk to your program director, and they can work on that with you and pretty quickly change the budget so that you have funding to participate. And any questions in general about the budget, as I mentioned, should go directly to your program director. Phase I workshop is kind of the last near-term thing I want to talk about. Again, it's 3 days here in Arlington. The principal investigator of the project is required to attend. You're welcome to bring more folks, and especially if the PI of your project is not kind of the commercial lead for the product or service that you are working on developing with our funding, we recommend you have the kind of entrepreneurial or business lead of that project, with one or more people in that role, also attends the workshop. Okay, so now that you have a government grant, this is all I think should be self-explanatory, but the government requires you to account for funding that we provide. We're not asking really for anything that's not kind of a standard best practices, but you need to have something that an accountant would say meets general accepted accounting principles. So some auditable way to track costs, to track indirect and direct costs separately, and to track funding on our NSF activities separate from spending on things that we're not paying for. If you don't know how to do this, you should either hire or consult an accountant. In addition to this being something that's legally required, it is something that will also be important if you apply for Phase II. We go through a deep financial review of your accounting practices and processes and systems, and also how you managed your Phase I funding is part of your Phase II review. And so it's a lot of reasons why this is something that should be important. If you've already kind of started this process, or you have concerns or questions, you can obviously reach out to your program director, and they will also sometimes bring in internal experts in accounting here at NSF who can answer kind of detailed questions. If you want to really dive in, there's a bunch of references here. There's a website that talks about the Phase II accounting review, and then there's a bunch of videos around basically how the kind of details about how we think about best practices for accounting for your Phase I award. All of this is on the Seed Fund site on our website. So I mentioned there's a lot of things that may change in Phase I. We fund Most of the companies in our program are startup companies. They often make major changes, sometimes because of our project, sometimes not because of our project. All those changes are typically things we can handle, but you do need to let us know, and especially there's a certain kinds of changes that can actually be very time-consuming from our side. So anything around your project, your budget, your scope, your research plan, your business model, those things are all usually pretty quick to change, but you need to justify the changes to your program director, and especially if it has to do with how you're spending our money, you have to kind of get approval in advance for any changes in the budget. If your company is changing its name as a DBA, or if it's changing the entity and actually creating a new corporate entity, those changes are things that you really want to talk to us about before you make any moves, because in some cases those changes during phase one can take a lot of time and can really bog down. The government is not generally built to fund or entities that are changing their, fundamentally changing their structure during the award. That's something that takes a little bit of work for us to handle. So, especially when you're changing your name or your entity or your corporate form, talk to your program director before you enter into any changes officially. If your award, we asked you to tell us how long your award was going to take when you applied. Sometimes it'll take longer than that. That's fine. There's not a big rush here. We want you to get this work right. The no-cost extensions are a very common change that people ask for. The only thing I will say about this is that the no-cost extension does not change the deadlines that you were given to submit your Phase 2 proposal. So your Phase 1 award letter has a list of dates on which you could submit your Phase 2 proposal. Those dates do not change for any reason. And so no-cost extensions are good if you still need time to do the Phase 1 work, but obviously your Phase 2 deadlines will have to be chosen independent of that. And you can apply for Phase 2 before your Phase 1 project is over, but obviously then you won't have as much technical progress to show if you're not done yet. So that's, again, something that's a great thing to talk to your program director about if you're struggling with this question about when to apply for Phase 2. There is a final report that's required. This is the only required time in your project where you need to submit a written report. And you submit actually 2 reports. The final report is a deep technical narrative that talks about what you did in the project. You also will submit something called a project outcomes report at the same time when the project is completely done. The project outcomes report is a 1-page public summary of the outcomes of the project. It goes directly from your pen to the American taxpayer, and so it's going to be non-proprietary information that's going to justify the government investment in the technology and the company and the impacts that you're having. All information about these reports is on our website on the reporting section of the For Phase 1 Awardees tab. One thing I will say is that, as I mentioned, $25,000 of your Phase 1 award will be held back and released to you only after your project report and your outcomes report are submitted. But you have to have spent all the funding that we gave you before you submit those reports. So there will be a cash flow shortfall that is imposed by our award towards the end of the award, where you're going to have to actually spend the money you've been given or spend it through other means or defer salary in order to kind of reimburse yourself after the report is submitted. So if that cash flow situation is going to be an issue, recommend you talk to your program director. I talked about the final payment. The government does have certain rights in IP that is developed based on our funding. You have to disclose those on the IEDISON database. The government does have margin rights for any federally funded IP. I will point out that the government has never actually exercised those rights, but it is a theoretical possibility, and in order to retain those rights, we need to know, we need for you to declare to us what intellectual property was developed as a result of our funding, and the IEDISON database is where you do that. There's more information, a lot more information about this in the award terms and conditions, which are linked in your in the email you got with your award notification. So we talked about Phase 2. You have 3 choices, and talk to your program director if you're not sure. my general advice to my portfolio companies is to just gear up and try to shoot for that first date, and then you can always decide if you're not ready. But it's always helpful, I think, to start going through the process of understanding whether you might be ready at the first date, because it keeps you focused and kind of aggressively moving forward. So you'll get email notifications and communications from NSF through all of these domains. Some of them are partners, contractors that we use. Just to ensure email receipt, these are domains that you should make sure you have added to your safe list. And not a whole lot here that I want to reiterate. I think we've covered most of this. Again, there are terms and conditions that are associated with your award that are linked in your award letter. If you have not read that, it's a pretty long document, but it's important. If you have not at least skimmed through that, I would recommend going back to your Phase I award letter, your award email, and clicking the terms and conditions link to kind of look through. A lot of the real relevant information is on our website, seedfund.nsf.gov, under the Resources tab. And that is all that I have. So I'm going to thank you for your attention, and in some cases for hearing the same content twice, and open up the line for questions.
Thank you. And at this time, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1. Please unmute your phone and record your name clearly when prompted. Once again, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1. And one moment, please, for the first question. Once again, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1. Sir, our first question today is from Hugh Mann.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Dr. Schrag, for that overview. I had a couple of questions. One is there a list of accountants who are familiar with sort of NSF and grant procedures that you might be able to share? And then, or do we just go find an accountant on our own? And then the second question was, you mentioned there's one Phase II award for each Phase I, and I'm wondering if that's for only NSF Phase II, or that also applies, say, an NIH Phase II, if you're considering going for that. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, so for the first question, we can't provide any specific recommendations for any service providers, including accountants, unfortunately. Luckily, again, we're not asking for rocket science in the accounting world. It's pretty straightforward, I think, accounting 101 type stuff. But one thing I think you mentioned is, you know, a lot of accountants who are kind of familiar with government, quote unquote, government work are thinking contracts. So make sure that your accountant understands that this is a grant and not a contract, because there are some differences. My general advice to my portfolio companies about accountants is to kind of go through your network, specifically if you have other startups that you know, because I think there's a specific set of needs and criteria for startups that, you know, you want your accountant to be familiar with. So yeah, hopefully your own network can help you with that. As far as the second question, yeah, there is one Phase II proposal at NSF, one opportunity to submit a proposal per Phase I award. I'm not totally sure how other agencies, if you got your Phase I from us, whether you can apply for a Phase II other agencies. I know that we don't permit you to apply for Phase II based on a Phase I from any other agency, but it might be that that other agencies do permit you to go straight to Phase II based on our Phase I, and you'd have to kind of, I think, just ask them specifically. I think in general, again, the difference between a contracting agency and a granting agency, you know, the agencies that do SBIRs as contracts may be more willing to consider a Phase II if you're actually doing something the agency is interested in. But you'd have to probably just reach out to their programs directly.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our next question is from Scott Berg.
Hi, thanks for taking the question. In the presentation, you said that we've already received awards. If we haven't received an award yet, should we expect one pending, or Are some awards just delayed, awaiting a little more documentation?
Yeah, so I think if you're on the if you're on this webinar, I believe you've been recommended. There may be more documentation, and recommended does not mean you get an award. There are ways you can fail to receive an award at this state. In general, since you're on the webinar today, we anticipate that there's a good chance that you will have an award sometime in the next couple of weeks because, as I mentioned, most of the programming and the kind of programs and the opportunities that we have do start here towards the end of January. And if you weren't going to have a chance to get into those, we could wait to have the kickoff. So that's the goal. 100% chance for everybody here is not the case, but we're cautiously optimistic that you'll have an award in the next couple weeks.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And our next question is from Omid.
Hi, Dr. Schrag. This is Omid from Lucida Research. Thank you for your wonderful explanation. I think I received an answer to my first question in your answer to the previous caller, so that's good. My other question was regarding the announcement of the award. I think there was something about press releases and things like that. I only have got one email that says award ID and then CI, my name, and then there is the explanation of the award and amount. And I'm also getting some weekly notices, which I got one of. Have I missed anything, or these are the emails that I was supposed to be receiving?
Yes, I'm not familiar with where you are in the process, but yeah, there is a press release template. In fact, I think you can actually, I think some of this information you can get from our website. You don't have to be an awardee. It's just general advice for our grantees about how you might create a press release. It's hard for me to know, based on not knowing where you are in the process, what you should have received, but if you've been, I assume everyone on this call has gotten some communications from a program director, and so I would ask them that question because they're probably more familiar with exactly, where in the process you should be. So if you want to kind of let them know, here's what I've received, am I missing anything, then I would recommend going that route. In general, we may, we take sometimes it takes a lot longer than you expect to have things happen here in the government, and usually, statistically speaking, it's more likely that we're just taking our time rather than you've missed something, but it can't hurt to reach out.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Our next question is from James.
Hello. Thanks, Ben. Question for you. If you're making or proposing a budget change, I noticed when you go into Fastlane that it seems like the budget is frozen. So is the process first interacting with your program manager and then changing, or is it an informal process as opposed to a formal one?
That's a great question. Yeah. So this is one of, by the way, this is one of the places where the idea of grants versus contracts also comes out. So yeah, after the award is made, all the budget changes are not done through Fastlane anymore. They're all done by email, by written communication, via email typically. And yeah, the program director conversation is the first step for almost any of these changes, but you'll find that assuming the program director is willing to make the changes or they agree with the changes you're proposing, that will all just be done by email and documented that way. So you're, I don't know if you're happy or not happy about this, but you may not have to go into Fastlane for quite a while.
Personally, I'm happy, but that's a different story. Okay. All right. Thank you, Ben. Okay.
Sure. Thanks, James.
Thank you. And as a reminder to ask a question, please press *1. And our next question, I believe, is from Janeri.
Generic.
Yes, ma'am, your line is open.
Hi. So my question is about STTR awardee versus the SBIR. Are there any major differences, mainly with the information that you just provided? Thank you.
Yeah, no, sorry, so I wasn't clear about this, but the reason I didn't mention STTR is there's no functional change in any of the opportunities I mentioned. So the only difference at NSF, the only difference between SBIR and STTR has to do with how the budget is allocated. Presumably, you've been working with that. I think most of you are at least at or past the stage where you've kind of thought about budget details. So once the award starts, there's really no functional difference. You probably know that for STTR, you have this academic or research institution working with you as a partner, and there's a requirement in STTR projects that a certain percentage of the budget go to that research institution. 30% is the minimum budget. If that requirement becomes an issue, that requirement is actually something that you can get a waiver from. So there's actually there's no practical difference in the two programs, although obviously STTRs are initially budgeted with this fairly significant research institution participation. But nothing else I said will be any different for STTR.
Thank you. Our next question is from Sandy.
Hi. Is it? Okay.
Yep, go ahead with your question.
Thanks. So we're in the process of hiring the person we're going to fund with this grant, and the 12 months start on the 15th. Should we automatically submit an extension or wait till towards the end of the award? Because, that we funded for a 12-month person.
Yeah. So I mean, there's no law telling you that you have to start work the day that we make the award effective. If you think there's going to be a significant delay here at the beginning, I would just get started when you can and not worry about the extension yet. There's no reason to kind of speculate 12 months in advance how much extension you're going to need. When you get to the last month or two of the award, if you're not able to catch up and you're still, so because you started late, you're going to finish late, that's fine. But we'd rather just have you request the extension when you kind of know what you need. If your award is going to be delayed by several months in terms of getting started, it's probably a good idea to let the program director know, because that's a pretty big change. But there's no formal requirement to do anything beyond that.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you. And our next question is from David.
Hi, this is David from Waveray.
Hi, David.
You talked a little bit about the competitiveness in Phase 1. Can you talk a little bit about Phase 2 in terms of if we do our work and all the financials are in place, is it likely to receive a Phase 2, or is that yet another competitive situation?
Yeah, everything's competitive, and so I can just tell you that the success rate has been around 50% plus or minus in the last several years. Phase 1 is closer to 15, so it's the numbers are higher, but obviously now you're competing against all Phase 1 winners. So I'm not sure if that's good or bad. I do think there's a lot of things that go to being a strong Phase 2. One of them is the Phase 1 technical outcomes, and then there's a lot of other things beyond the project around the commercial case and traction and other things you're working on outside of our funding to prepare yourself. I think one of the things that I would recommend is that your program director, at this point in time, they've presumably, for most of you, they've been really thinking deeply about your business over the last couple of months because they've been wondering whether or not to recommend you for funding. They probably have some ideas about what is in their head about what's important, what they're worried about, what they like, what you need to work on. And so some of them may or may not be willing to tell you that because they do have to eventually be an impartial judge of your Phase 2. But I would recommend that you really kind of try to get, if you can, get them to kind of give you their sense of what you need to work on. They're not going to give you a number, I don't think. None of us know. Even if we knew, if we were able to tell you what the percentage chance in our brain was that you're able to get a Phase 2, we wouldn't be able to figure it out. But yeah, they may have some thoughts on that could be helpful for you to understand what the kind of goalposts for Phase 2 are.
Terrific. Well, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you. And our next question is from Montreal.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, this is Manfredo from Frost Defense. Thank you for taking the time to answer all our questions. So my question is regarding to the budget. You mentioned, I know that we have to ask for approval for every change in the budget, but I'm wondering if there is any percentage, like a 5-10% that we can move without asking permission, or is in any case we have to ask for permission when we change a little bit?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so different program directors have different kind of levels of at least notification they want for the budget. I don't think any of the program directors needs to see changes sub $5,000. You obviously can't. You're not allowed to. There's certain things you're not allowed to spend any money on, even a single dollar. But if you're certainly if you're staying within the kind of general categories and scope that you proposed, I think that our terms and conditions say 5% of the total budget is the threshold, and so that would be a little over $10,000 for many of you, for most of you. So I think when in doubt, reach out to your program director, but I don't think anybody is going to want to see anything below a few $1,000s in terms of changes. If you are going to do something dramatically different, right, if you're spending money in a way that's dramatically different from what has been approved by NSF, I think in that case you probably want to reach out. But certainly we see a lot of companies where like one person may work a month more than they thought, and another person may work a month less, and that would probably represent $5,000 or $10,000 of change. Those kind of changes are not necessary because you're still paying for the same people we already know about and the same things you already know about. It's not about changing and moving money between things that we've already approved. It's really more about allocating money to things that we haven't considered that you need to be careful about. But I'd say as a general rule of thumb, anything starts to be about $5,000 or more, you might want to kind of reach out. And the program director will tell you if it's too little, too much when you do so.
Okay, thank you very much.
Of course.
Thank you. Our next question is from Uman.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, actually, it was the same question around the definition of a budget change. So I think you've covered it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
And once again, to ask a question, please press star 1. And our next question is from Cassidy Wong.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I think it was mentioned in some of the terms documents and in the webinar as well. As a part of the final report, the actual project expenses are required to be reported. And I think somewhere it also mentioned that the final $25,000 would not be distributed until it's been demonstrated that all of the remainder of the funds have been spent or allocated. I was wondering what happens if you reach the end of the project and complete all of the objectives under the expected budget. What happens to the rest of the funds?
Yeah, so if you get the entire scope done and you have a significant amount of money left, we ask you to work with the program director to figure out what you're going to do with that money. And typically, for all of you, there's a lot more work to be done than, that's why you all request the maximum, because you're asking, you need more money than we can provide. So usually there's stuff left that we want you to do and that you want to do, and you would just email the program director and work with them to figure out what that looks like. There are cases where there's nothing else you want to do, and in some cases we can terminate the award at whatever amount you've spent. Now the fee is, you guys, many of you requested a fee. That is money to do with whatever you like, but everything else has to be spent on, R&D. And if you're not going to spend it, you have to give back what you didn't spend. The other thing I want to mention just relative to your question is you mentioned that terms and conditions require what you call the project ledger. So that's actually something that we ask you to have if we ask for it, but it's not necessarily asked for with most of our Phase 1 projects. So it's not a standard part of our reporting to have a breakdown of the expenditures. But you should be able to, when you submit the Phase 1 final report, you should be able to show that all the money we gave you, other than the fee, you should be able to show that you spent it and how you spent it and have documentation backing that up. The fee is up to you. You get to do whatever you want with it or keep it and not spend it. We don't actually require you to show us what you do with it. It's yours. But everything else has, these restrictions on the funding.
Okay.
I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And our next question is from Sam.
Hi there. I just had a brief question about the boot camp and just what the percentage of participants who received SBIR and STTR grants were that participated in that, and then what their perception was of going through that boot camp.
Yeah, so it's a very high percentage, to the mid to upper 90s. It's I don't know. It's definitely above 90%. I don't have the exact number, but last cohort I checked, it was more than 90% of the companies participated. Generally, it's received very positively. To be honest, we don't get a lot of companies telling us our program sucks. There's obviously a bias in feedback because we are a funding agency, but just having worked with companies, I can tell you that it's really, really positively received. Now, if your company's already understands customer discovery, you've already gone through I-Core, a program like that, and the boot camp is less important for you because you kind of know you have that tool in your toolbox, and you're definitely welcome to go through it anyway, but obviously if you really feel like you've already got that down pat, you can talk to your program director about opting out. The other thing is if your company really has your business model nailed down. Most of our companies don't, honestly. They're mostly startups, and they're completely in the dark about a lot of their business model, which is fine. That's part of the point of our program. But yeah, other than that, we really strongly recommend going through it. The customer discovery is, I think, pretty universally accepted as like really the key way for startups to figure out their business model these days. And I think the instructors in the curriculum we have are pretty effectively tailored towards these kind of deep technology companies that you guys are.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And sorry, I didn't mention the satisfaction, but I think we have, I don't know if we have data that's shareable, but we do ask you a lot of times how you feel and what you like, and we've consistently gotten, like, again, 80s or 90s type of, would you recommend this to those type of, I can't remember what they call them, but marketers use that customer recommendation number. So it's, I think, pretty well received statistically as well.
Okay, great.
Thank you. And our next question is from Sandy.
Hi, it's me again. I was just curious when somebody was asking a question about drawing down funds and everything. So when we draw down for like direct costs, it's pretty easy to figure out. But while we're doing that, should we be drawing down for the indirect and the fee at the same time, or just do it at different times, or it doesn't matter?
I don't think it matters to us. I mean, the big thing about when you draw money down is that basically, depending on how your company is structured and what kind of company you are, there are some companies where if you draw down money and you don't spend it before the end of your fiscal year, you have to pay taxes on it because it looks like income.
Right. Okay.
So as long as you can avoid that, I think, whatever makes sense. And the other thing is, don't, it's not a rocket science. Like if you're an accountant, I mean, I would ask an accountant just to make sure, but honestly, we don't want you to have a vow of poverty, and we don't want you to spend half your time trying to get down to the nearest cent of the indirect costs, right? So yeah, so I think do your diligence, but also don't overstress that factor. I mean, there are, to be honest, there are plenty of companies that I think draw down like the entire amount right away. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Again, I'm not in the details of how they do it. I'm not sure that's the right thing to do, but it seems to be that's a pretty dramatic approach, and it seems to work out for most companies. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our next question is from Omid.
Hi, this is Omid again. I was thinking if you could maybe provide some statistics about how many companies applied for the SBIR grant at this phase, and then how many were accepted, like some statistics about acceptance ratio, things like that at this point, so we know how we competed in a way.
Sure. Yeah. So, by the way, there's reports on this kind of data for all the agencies that do SBIR. If you go to sbir.gov and go to the company, there's a report section about awardees. I think it's called annual reports, and you can look up this data. I think the last one that was published was for fiscal year 17 is the last data that's out there, and I believe our success rates, like I said, are in the teens for phase 1, around 50% for phase 2. You can look that up, and the number of companies that apply historically per year we had typically between 2,000 to 2,500 companies apply for Phase 1 per year. And then obviously, knowing how many Phase 1 awards there are, most of those companies apply for Phase 2. Something like 80 to 90% of them apply for Phase 2. And so I feel like that was something on the order of a few hundred per year. But yeah, you can look up the exact numbers every year on SBIR.gov.
Okay, so it's not available immediately for this particular period, but on a, I don't know, every 2 years or so, maybe there is some data available, detailed data.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, the number of awards is available immediately because every award is public, so you could theoretically go on our award search right now and you could search, you could get every award by date, you know, up till today on the NSF award search. Proposals we don't ever tell anybody about except for numbers and aggregate, and so we do those yearly, but honestly it lags behind by about a year because there's a pretty lengthy process about how we get that data together. So yeah, the number of awards per year you can get up to present day. The number of proposals is going to be lagging.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
And I am showing no further questions at this time.
Okay, let me take a couple of things, and if no questions come through, then we can call it a day. I have an email address up that is kind of a general email address for the program. If for whatever reason your program director, you don't want to email them directly, you can email this address. I am one of the people who monitors it, so you can get to me that way as well. I have a Twitter handle up here if you want to follow us on Twitter. That's a good way to see what things are going on, and obviously to also see what's going on with our portfolio. Our portfolio, I didn't mention this, but having an award from us is a really good indicator that you're going to be commercially successful. Our portfolio companies last year raised about $2 billion in follow-on funding, which is 10 times as much as the amount of money we invested. So that's a good sign for all of you, and a lot of those companies' success stories you can find through our Twitter handle and through our social media. And feel free to reach out if anything that I can do. I look forward to meeting as many of you as possible in March. Unless there's any other questions, I will end it. Elon, are we done?
Yep, I'm showing no further questions, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you, and thank you everyone for attending, and best of luck with your Phase 1 award.
Thank you. And this does conclude today's conference. You may disconnect at this time.